family for generations. And at over 100 acres, it was a commanding piece of land that was once a major agricultural hub outside of the town of Harmony. Time hadn't been kind to Harmony, or our farm. I believe the problems began when the factories and rail yards shut down. One after another, landowners, tired of mounting debt, picked up and left. The once proud main street of Harmony was a shell, with family-owned businesses gutted and replaced by shady pawn shops and bars with tinted windows. There was nowhere else for us to go. Father was too proud to walk away from the land. My great-great-grandfather built this farm. We ain't leaving. He was a real mean bastard, my old man. Always had been since the day I was born. Mother was a quiet, submissive woman, and while I loved her, there was little she could do to shield me from his drunken rage. You know, when the Lord took her from us a few years back, it was unexpected, brutal, and left me alone to manage the farm with a man whose demeanor only grew darker with every swallow of his cheap rot-gut whiskey. Our farmhands became less farmhands and more drinking buddies. It wasn't unusual for me to be jolted awake in the middle of the night with the blast of my old man's sawed-off double-barreled shotgun and exploding glass as the three of them hooted and hollered, having target practice from the sagging porch of our once grand farmhouse. It was an early morning after one of those late-night target practice sessions, and an unseasonable early cold chill swept through the rustling stalks of corn, and I wanted to get up early to do some maintenance on our ancient John Deere grain combine. Everything on our farm was falling apart, and it was up to me to fix it or face my father's wrath. That morning, he was passed out on the porch, shotgun still in his lap, flanked by Silas and Tom, who was face down on the floor. As I quietly tiptoed down the porch stairs, my boots crunched over a large piece of glass from the previous night's events. It was enough to stir them. Wide-eyed, I whirled around and met eyes with my old man. With a sadistic grin, he raised his shotgun. "You want to wake me up this goddamn early in the morning, you clumsy bastard? Better run, boy." I took off running. As he wildly started firing shots in my general direction, I could hear Silas and Tom laughing just as loud as thunder. Tears streamed down my face as I ran into the cornfield. I could run away, but where would I go? I had no money, no friends. I didn't even go to school. I barely knew how to read. This godforsaken farm was the only place I knew. I was trapped here. I was working on the rusty header from the combine when I first noticed the old Scarecrow. He'd been there for as long as I could remember, to the point where I barely noticed him when I went by. He was perched high above the ground, nailed to a withered T-shaped post in a way that reminded me of the billboards that dotted the road outside of town. A bloody Jesus, nailed to the cross, eyes open wide, face contoured in pain, promising eternal damnation for those who have not been saved. I put down my tools and stood up, regarding the Scarecrow more closely. He was made up of old coveralls and tattered burlap sacks stuffed with hay that protruded from every extremity. His face was an old rubber Halloween jack-o'-lantern mask, faded and worn from years of being exposed to the elements. Staring into the black eye holes, a throaty whisper spoke to me. "It's time, Jesse." I whirled around, expecting to find Silas or Tom, but was only met with the waving stalks of corn. I turned back to the Scarecrow. I couldn't help but notice he had shifted on the crossbeam. Hay loosely fell around him. It had to be the wind. He didn't just move. I was tired. I had work to do. I was too old to be getting creeped out by a stupid scarecrow. Turning my attention back to the grain combine, I had barely picked up my tools when I heard shuffling behind me, like hay being thrashed about with a pitchfork. The hair stood up on the back of my neck as a cold chill shot through me. With rising adrenaline and terror, I slowly turned around to see the Scarecrow standing before me. He raised his filthy gloved finger and pointed it right at me. The black void behind his eye holes of his mask burned through me, rooted to the ground. Eyes wide with disbelief and terror, the wrench dropped from my hand. The brittle voice spoke to me. There's no need to be afraid, Jesse. I've been part of this land long before your people. Let me help you. Let me help your poor soul. Haven't you suffered enough? Frozen in terror, his voice held me in place. Let me help you, poor soul. The word reverberated in my head. Nobody had ever helped me. I recalled Mother telling me when I was young that God works in mysterious ways. Maybe this was my way out. Maybe I was ready to be delivered. Take my hand, Jesse. He seemed more human now, more fluid in his movement, as if shifting forms. The tattered glove had reached out for me. It felt warm, real. Somewhere in the distance, the urgent cawing of a crow began to fill the air. My breath became shallow as I reached out to him. I felt shaky on my feet. The sounds of the crows grew louder and louder as my vision began to dim. The darkness enveloped me as I watched him transform. The weathered jack-o'-lantern mask was less a mask and more flesh and blood, with the void behind the eye holes now glowing an intense red. I jolted awake from the start. Disoriented and blurry-eyed, I began to focus and realized I was sitting in the passenger seat in the cab of the grain combine. Within seconds, the memory returned. Let me help you, Jesse. I whirled my head to the side to find the Scarecrow sitting in the driver's seat. He had now fully transformed. He wasn't human, but something else. The jack-o'-lantern mask was now terrifying, flesh and blood resemblance of a human face. He smiled a wide, jagged smile and pointed off into the darkness, beyond the windshield of the combine. I noticed the motor was running. The smell of diesel filled my nose. I followed the gaze of the Scarecrow and noticed movement on the ground ahead. And there was my old man, Silas and Tom, thrashing around like madmen and trying to scream for help through the rags that had been stuffed in their mouths. The three of them had been securely hogtied, and they all looked like they had been on the receiving end of a barroom beating. Who did this to them, I thought? It couldn't have been. It's time, Jesse. You know what must be done. With the horrifying realization dawning on me, I now knew how the Scarecrow intended to help me. The Scarecrow creature whipped the engine and threw the gear into drive, and the combine began to lurch forward as the rotor blades began to spin. Please, no! I began to scream, but before I even had a chance to protest, the Scarecrow reached across and wound his skeleton fingers around my neck and with a surprising intensity. This is what you wanted, Jesse. I am going to free you from this place. The Scarecrow laughed as my eyes went wide. The combine bounced with a sickening crush as the whirling rotator blades ran over the three hog-tied men in the field. Their sickening screams cut short as they were inside the powerful machine. For a brief moment, I recalled being in the kitchen with my mother, standing over the blender, helping her puree tomatoes from the garden. I watched in wonder as the fat, ripe tomatoes were instantly liquefied by the powerful steel blades. A sense of calm came over me as I thought of my father, Silas, and Tom. Just like those tomatoes, I looked back and watched as the chunks of 3 men shot out of the back of the combine, spraying the cornfield in a shower of crimson. Good. I smiled. They got what they deserved. The combine barreled forward, undeterred by the 3 men it had effectively just liquefied. I turned back to the Scarecrow, my new friend, my savior, the one who set me free. I didn't understand what I was seeing. The Scarecrow was still in the driver's seat, booted foot firmly lodged on the gas pedal, but it had reverted back to his original form. The flesh and blood creature was once again a limp, hay-filled sack. I've told this story many times. First to the policemen, you had to see the looks on their faces when they saw what the Scarecrow did. Then the man in the lab coats, and the nice doctors with their comfortable couches and soft voices. Nobody believes me. They think I did it myself. They think I somehow managed to hog-tie 3 grown men and run over them with a grain combine. In the newspapers, they wrote about me and called it a revenge killing. Maybe it was, but I didn't do it. It was the Scarecrow. I'm telling you, he was alive. You believe me, don't you? I'm not crazy. I promise. Please. You gotta believe me out here. Wouldn't me? It was a Scarecrow. I'm telling you, he's still out there in the field. You'll see, he's out there. I'm not crazy. The Scarecrow did it.